Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 6:30, so we'll start the meeting. Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee. On the table here, I'm Councillor Richard Butler, the chairman of the committee. To my left is Councillor Stockwood, who is the vice chairman. To his left is Mr. Norman, who is a legal services manager, and we have Mrs. Coop from our constitutional services, who will be taking minutes. And to my right is Mr. Pegram, who is a service manager for communities, and to his right is Mr. Sharman, who is an area planning officer. So welcome to tonight's meeting. I have to just read out a statement about microphones. The openness of local government bodies regulations 2014 allows filming and recording by anyone attending a meeting. This is not within the council's control. Rushcliffe Borough Council is committed to being open and transparent in its decision making. As such, the council will undertake audio recordings of meetings which are open to the public, except where it's resolved that the public be excluded, as the information that's been discussed is confidential or otherwise exempt. And in order to enable the recording, please use the microphones at all times when speaking, and tonight's meeting is being recorded for training purposes only. That's basically telling us how to use the microphones or what we're supposed to do with them. So we'll go into the meeting. Do we have any apologies for absence, please? Or substitute
yes,
members?
we just have apologies from Councillor Greenwood and we have Councillor Purdue as a substitute.
Okay, happy with that. And any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code? Anything to declare? No? Okay, thank you. So, minutes of the previous meetings, which were two, of course. It was one meeting but held on two separate dates, on the 11th and 25th of October, because we had to carry items over. Those of us who are here, are we happy with those are correct, and should I sign them? Yes. Okay, thank you. It's the 15th, isn't it?
Councillor Mallender wants the attendance corrected.
Oh, right. Oh, right.
You just say that.
Right. Yes. Yes, Councillor Mallender.
Councillor Jones's book pointed out that I'm not listed as an attendee, and I was at both meetings. And I did sign in on both meetings.
You're correct. Yes, you're not on the minutes. Well, it's an oversight. It's so yes, we certainly know you were here. So we will correct the minutes accordingly. So with that correction, we're happy with the minutes then. So, thank you. I'm sure it's nothing personal, so it's just it was a long night, I think.
Twice.
Right, just get those out of the way. Right, so we will now start the main items of tonight's agenda, which are tonight's planning applications. Hopefully everyone's got sight of an agenda, and the first item tonight is Homefield Cottage, London Lane, Willoughby on the Wolds. And this is demolition of an existing farm building and construction of 4 new dwellings with garages and shared drive, and it's a revised scheme. Mr. Pegram, I think you're taking us through this.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Chairman, you had late representations circulated yesterday, including comments from the highway engineer on this one. We have also had comments from our environmental health team based on the previous use of the land for agricultural purposes. If permission were granted, they would recommend the condition that a contaminated land survey is undertaken to determine if there is any contamination on the site. We also had comments from our recycling officer basically confirming that if permission was granted, he would require a facility for the storage of wheelie bins close to the road. As you'll see in a moment, the layout is such that he wouldn't take his bin lorries down the private drive.
We've also had the...
Yes, Chairman, yes, you've also had sent directly to you a brochure from the applicant's architect.
So you've all received one of these. I think it came an email on the email yesterday, didn't it? Yes, so we've got that. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, Chairman, so the site is on London Lane at Willoughby on the Wolds. It's the area which is outlined in red on this screen. There's an existing property called Homefields there with an access through, and then you'll see in the photographs, there's a farm building located at the rear of the site. There's also, down through here, you'll see from the photographs, there's a highway verge with a number of trees within the verge, and then obviously to the east of the site and south is open field, and then you have far back lane down at the bottom. That's the aerial photograph confirming those details. This isn't quite up to date. I'm not sure if they've been built yet, but there's approval for 2 dwellings in that area there, and there's approval for a 3rd property, a bungalow, in the field there, in the piece of land there. You can see from this Homefield Cottage and the agricultural building there. This is then standing on London Lane looking through a field gate across the field, where the application site is behind the hedge to the left. And that's standing in the field looking in a generally northerly direction, so you can pick up from here Homefield Cottage sits in that area there, and the agricultural building there, and you'll see the trees on the roadside, which you'll see in the photographs in a moment. That's on the roadside, Chairman, looking again in a generally northerly direction. There's the access into Homefield Cottage, which would be shared with the development, so the access would share Homefield Cottage and the proposed 4 dwellings. You can see this is a highway verge here, and there are a number of trees. This tree here would sit within the visibility space for the access. There's been a debate between Highways and the applicant and the parish council, as I understand it. Highways, if that tree were to be retained, would object on the basis of the effect on the visibility display. The parish councils confirm they don't have any objection to the removal of that tree. If that tree goes on that basis, the Highway Authority don't object, and you have their recommended conditions in the event that planning permission was granted. That's turning around, looking back down London Lane, back. That's the tree again that I just referred to. So the application site here is on the left. And then looking into the application site through the access, you can see there's a change in level between the road and the actual field and the application site itself. And then stepping a bit further up London Lane, looking back down the lane, so your access into your site is roughly there. You can see the trees again there, and picking up some of the other properties in the area. Again, looking across the front of the site here at the access, and then again stepping up the hill a bit, looking back down towards where the access is. Now looking into the access, so this is where access will be gained to the development through this driveway, past Homefield Cottage on the left, and then again standing in the field a bit closer this time to the top end of the field where the development would be located in this area here. Moving across the field, so again that farm building would come down, we've got Homefield Cottage, and there is London Lane running down through there. Turning around, slightly different angle. And then standing near where that agricultural building is, that's the track that serves the current agricultural building, Chairman. And there it is. So, excuse the grid lines, this is the submitted site and location plan, just confirming the extent of the site outlined in the red. There's the sort of driveway up to the barn that you saw, and the barn that would be demolished with Homefield Cottage there. Again, Chairman, just slightly bigger scale, showing you those details. Obviously the trees on the roadside as well. And then this is the proposed layout. So Homefield Cottage stays as is. The barn would be removed, and the proposal is for 2 3-bedroom properties. That's that one there and that one there, and 2 4-bedroom properties, which are the outside 2, with double detached garages in that position. Just to go through the floor plans, Chairman, the outer pair you saw there, the outer 2 detached units, 4 bedrooms, living room accommodation at ground floor. That's the proposed elevations. Design taking its cues from Homefield Cottage itself, with cropped eaves and sloping roofs above half dormers, you might call them those. That's the layout of the 3-bedroom properties. That's the property that sits in the middle at the back, 3 bedrooms, living accommodation with an integral garage on this one. And again, picking up its design cues from Holmfield Cottage. And that's the one of the other 4-bedroom ones, very similar. And then the 3-bedroom one, which sits on the right-hand side of the drive as you move in. So 3 bedrooms upstairs, living accommodation downstairs, and again picking up design cues from Holmfield Cottage. Just to confirm, that's the layout, Chairman. There is currently a public footpath that goes across this site, runs across the field, and joins up with public footpaths on the far corner of the field. If permission were granted, that would have to be diverted. We do have powers under the Town and Country Planning Act to effectively activate such a diversion on the back of any planning permission that might be granted. That's the details of the double garages. And then giving you a bit of a street scene, if I zoom in, because it's a bit grainy there, Chairman, if I come in a bit. So that shows you, looking from the road, that's Holmfield Cottage, that's the property on the right of the access drive, giving you the relationship with those two. And then moving down, sorry, it's down the bottom, isn't it? That's effectively the street scene of the 3 properties that would sit at the back of the site. So you've got your 2 4-bedroom properties either side of the 3-bedroom detached house in the middle. Oh, I'll zoom out again now. That's just, Chairman, confirming the potential or possible route of a diversion for the footpath, but clearly that would have to be subject of a separate process to divert the footpath around the development. And this just confirms the tree layout at the front and the visibility displays. And if I zoom in a bit, you will see, Chairman, that that tree sits within the visibility display. That tree would have to be removed, obviously, to ensure that there was unimpeded visibility across the frontage of the site. Chairman, the main consideration in this one is whether or not this is considered to be appropriate development. Will it be on the Wolds is not identified as a village or a settlement for growth. It therefore comes in the lower echelon of the hierarchy, which is effectively infill or development to meet local needs. That is described in the text of the core strategy as development of small-scale infill development to meet local needs. The debate really with this one, if I come back to probably that slide, or no, actually probably the better one because that's a bit fussy with the grid lines. We come back to that. So the question really, Chairman, is this small-scale infill? I would suggest to you that it's not infill. There is no definition of infill, as we discussed at the previous meeting. However, Chairman, we do have a little bit more help from our Part 2 plan, which attempts to provide a bit more assistance in this area, which does describe small-scale infill is considered to be development on small gaps within existing built fabric of the village or previously developed sites. So clearly this is, in your officer's view, not within the built fabric of the village. It's not isolated either, clearly, so it doesn't contravene the aims of the NPPF, which encourages us to avoid isolated dwellings in the countryside. This, Chairman, I would suggest to you is more a question of, is development in keeping with the pattern of development in the area, and does it result in any harm in terms of the expansion of the village? Your officers are of the view that it does. It is encroaching further south beyond what we consider to be the edge of the village. Members will read in the papers there was a previous application on the other side. The application site's over here. There was an application in this location, which was for development. That was refused permission and dismissed at appeal in 2016 on the basis that it did extend beyond the edge, as the inspector considered the edge of the village. Clearly, Chairman, we always tell you each application is on its own merits, but clearly given the relatively young age of that decision, your officers do consider that that is a material consideration that should be given some significant weight. So clearly, that's the application site in this area here, and the site you've just seen that was the subject of appeal was just over here. So you can see that there are similarities between those two developments. Chairman, your officers are of the view that notwithstanding any benefits that might arise from this development, those benefits are not outweighed by the harm that would result to the character and appearance of this part of Willoughby on the Wolds, and on that basis the application is before you with a recommendation to refuse permission as set out in the recommendation on page 41, going over to page 42. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. We have public speakers for this item. It's a new facility we have at the Borough Council, and this is the moment we come to this. I have Mr. Akers, I think, is here, who is speaking on behalf of the applicant. Right, so if you sit at the chair there, you have up to 5 minutes, and as soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button, the red light will come on, and the clock will start counting down. And it's not a two-way. It's literally just a talking to or addressing the committee. So soon, just press it once, so the light will stay on, and then when we finish, you just turn it off. But don't worry about that. We'll sort it out. So as soon as you're ready.
The application has commanded huge community support. The councillors, both district and parish, as well as from members of the public. So much so that we already have written statements of intent from members of the public who wish to occupy 3 of the 4 properties proposed, and we're confident that the 4th will sell quickly once it hits the open market. We took on board the advice of the council and thoroughly considered previous applications when putting together this proposal, thus reduced the size of each dwelling and provided a greater number of smaller homes as wanted by the community. I believe that the major concern of the local authority at this time is that, in their opinion, the new dwellings, propose a detrimental effect to the village of Willoughby on the Wolds, as the case officer states that the proposal would, quote, have a significant and detrimental impact on the rural character and the appearance of this open countryside location, end quote. I would go so far as to strongly disagree with this statement and argue strongly that that is non-quantifiable as an argument. We have purposely designed the properties and the overall site layout within, amongst others, the view from Back Lane footpath in mind, as shown in Figure 1 and Figure 2 of the submitted document that you will already have. I would encourage you to review this in detail when making your decisions. You will see almost negligible change on the visual skyline and silhouette of the village due to the proposed development. And with the choice of materials matching those of the buildings behind and the intended proposed planting and foliage, the site will settle into the landscape within a matter of months. I would also bring your attention to the dubious classification of the property as in Greenfield site. The property is a registered farm and has a dedicated DEFRA registration number, and has currently and in the past had a multitude of agricultural buildings on the site. I would also like to bring to your attention the recent approval of development of 5 much larger houses down Church Lane, which sticks out of the village boundary and is connected only on one side and has significantly less access provision. I would also disagree with the site not being within the village boundary and not considered as infill. Under the MPPF, the term infill is classed as within or adjacent to. Therefore, I would argue that for this additional reason, the site is considered infill, especially when considered against other recent, not yet built, planning approvals immediately adjacent to the proposed site to the north. The noted similar applications referred to by the case officer in his report, while similar in their submission typology, have completely different circumstances surrounding their refusal, mostly down to the fact that they would block key views and in the fact they were neighbouring listed buildings. You will note from this application no listed buildings are in the vicinity or within a conservation area. In conclusion, the MPPF in paragraph 14 requires harm to be balanced against the benefits and refusal only where, quote, any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole, end quote. As demonstrated within this statement, the proposal is considered to be compliant with the frameworks. As the proposal represents sustainable development which boosts the supply of housing within the rural community and would comply with Policy GP2 and Policy HOU2 of the Rushcliffe Borough Non-Statutory Replacement Local Plan. The properties will also maintain the viability of the village and the requirements of the Policy 55 under the MPPF. The identified benefits of the application outweigh minor harm, and as such the application should be approved in line with the MPPF. This is in addition to the significant local and public parish support. I speak now finally on behalf of the applicant's daughter. I have lived in the village of Willoughby on the Wolds for more than 50 years. I care deeply about the village, and my mother and father and daughter still inhabits the village. I also have my sole employment within the village full-time, and I am a caretaker for the village hall. My mother and father are of ill health and require constant support in order to battle their illnesses. This application's approval would allow me to remain in the village and continue to care for my mother and father, as well as provide a home for my daughter and I, and of course allow me to continue my duties within the community as caretaker of the village hall. As I am being forced to sell my home through no fault of my own, these smaller properties would be the only ones within the village that would allow me to remain here to continue to help my family and the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eric. If you could just press the button off again, that's it. And just within 5 minutes as well, so thank you very much. Well done for that. We also have the ward member who wishes to speak on this. This is Councillor Edivine. And so you know the role, the protocol. You've got up to 5 minutes as well. And as soon as you're ready, please.
Good evening, everybody. I find myself in the unusual position of asking you as a committee to grant an application that is recommended for refusal in the village that I live in. I read the report with dismay when I see the reasons for the recommendation. Willoughby is a village with few amenities. 20 years ago, when I moved there was a post office, a shop, a bakery and a pub. All of these have gone. We are, however, left with a school which does need pupils. Without some selective house building, we won't even have that. As one of my residents often says, we will be left with a dying or dead community. In my opinion, the report falls victim to what I call a one-size-fits-all planning policy with regard to housing mix. It says that there is no need for this mix of housing, and I beg to differ. It falls into the trap of describing this proposal as not demonstrating a need for housing of this type for local need. Willoughby certainly doesn't need any more large executive houses, numerous of which have been built over the last few years. Willoughby would, however, welcome a few houses that are modest in size, as these are. They are not defined as affordable, but the size of them means that their likely price might just make them affordable to a young family with children. The parish council do not object, and there are no objections from residents. The report makes reference to a planning application 1502170 outline, and I'll stress outline planning. This was rightly refused at appeal, as it obviously took a completely virgin site and extended the village boundary by some 100 metres, with obvious scope for further building had it been granted. The main issue at stake here seems to be a difference of opinion on what constitutes the village boundary. This application is adjacent to existing housing development. The site itself contains farm buildings, and I believe, as you've already heard, that there were once more farm buildings and a cottage on the site. And I can assure you that if residents of Willoughby thought that this was outside the village boundaries, you would have had numerous comments. Opposite the site, and please look at the over the road from the site very carefully, opposite the site is the village hall, and beyond that, on the opposite side, is a dwelling which this proposal does not extend beyond. It's my opinion that, unlike the site previously refused, this does not create an incursion beyond the existing village edges, nor would it lend itself to incursion beyond the village edge by allowing subsequent development which would be beyond the village boundary. Reference is made to the loss of ridge and furrow pattern, I would agree that a very small amount will be lost, but it is in a small proportion of the total site, and the whole area around Willoughby, if anyone knows it, is very rich with this landscape feature. The proposed tree removal is not considered inappropriate by the Parish Council, and the tree in question should probably have been removed some time ago. As you could see from the photos, it is right on the highway edge and a potential hazard. If granted, then a suitable planting condition could be added to make up for the loss of a common ash. Whilst I understand some of the ways in which the planning policies have been interpreted to reach the recommendation before you, I do not believe that this proposal is either unsustainable or harmful. And I hope you really can see the common sense to grant its approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Edivan. That's well within time again. So we've heard from Mr. Akers and Mr. Edivan, both in support, Councillor Edivan in support of the application, pointing out public support, no local objections, and looking to the future of the village. Would you like to pick up on any of those, please? Thank you.
Chairman, which bit's first? Chairman, just to confirm, there is no definition of infill, either in the MPPF or in our own local plan. The term infill is generally recognised as a gap within an otherwise built-up frontage or fabric of the settlement. In this instance, Chairman, this is at the end of a built-up frontage. It's not considered to be flanked on all sides by development, and I don't think it can be described as infill. The only, looking in the MPPF, there is reference in there to dwellings adjacent to existing settlements where they're proportionate in size to them. They relate to entry-level starter homes, which this scheme is not proposing entry-level starter homes. Reference was also made, Chairman, to the fact that this, or is alluded to, the fact that this is previously developed land. The definition of previously developed land, is on the basis that it has farm buildings on it or had farm buildings on it and is an agricultural holding. The definition in the MPPF specifically excludes agricultural buildings from the definition of previously developed land. So this is, in my mind, clearly a greenfield site. That deals with those 2 points. In terms of the appeal decision that was referred to, Chairman, there were other reasons for refusal. Yes, accepted. There were listed buildings. There were other aspects. There was highway issues as well. But the inspector did, in fact, in his decision notice, say, in this case, the erosion of this edge of the village, which would result from this development, would harm the clarity of the boundary between built form and the rural hinterland. And he did give, in his decision, some weight to that issue, Chairman. I believe there are similar considerations in this application. Chairman, there was reference to the fact that the scheme has attracted huge support. Members will be aware that volume of support or opposition to an application is not in itself a material consideration or reason for granting permission. However, Chairman, I would say in this instance we received 4 letters of support and a letter of support from the Parish Council. I will leave you to determine in your own minds whether that's huge, but as I say, that's not in itself a reason for granting permission. We don't dispute, Chairman, that the dwellings are well designed. They take cues from the existing buildings in the area, from Holmfield Cottage itself. So in terms of design, no, that isn't an objection, and you'll see that that does not feature as a reason for refusal in the recommended reasons for refusal. Excuse me, Chairman. This is more about pattern of development, and your officer's view is that, similar to the appeal inspector, that this would erode the edge of the village. You have in the document that was sent to you by the architect the image which attempts to demonstrate how excuse me, Chairman, this development would blend into the existing fabric of the village. It's a little bit difficult to get a true sense of the impact from that, Chairman. What you don't see necessarily from that are boundary treatments and other paraphernalia that you would get with residential occupation. So clearly it's not in my view, not a true representation. The other issue, Chairman, is although there are good hedgerow boundaries, you do still get glimpses across this field. The other important factor is there is that footpath that runs pretty much across that line. So there is public access to this field, and in your officer's view, that would affect the character and the appearance of the area. Reference, Chairman, just to pick on one point, reference was made to paragraph 55 of the MPPF. I think that's the old MPPF. The equivalent paragraph is now paragraph 79 that deals with dwellings in the countryside and isolated dwellings. And the only other issue, Chairman, is that this is, as I say, this is not put forward as affordable housing. 2 of the units are 3 bedrooms. They may be more affordable, but in my view, Chairman, that isn't a factor that should be given significant weight in the determination of this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. Right, we can open up to committee discussion now. So, who would like to start off with this? Councillor Clark, please.
As always. Waiting to see if anybody else wants to.
No, there's no set pattern.
Right. If we were to metaphorically demolish on the west side of London Lane the buildings which are opposite this proposed site, and let's pretend just for a few seconds that they weren't there, then I would agree this would be extending the village curtilage into the open countryside. However, these buildings on the left, which on my Google Earth says it's the Willoughby on the Wolds preschool, which is just south of the village hall, the fact is they are there, and they're already there, and they already form the boundary of the village. So we've heard, and it's in writing, and we've heard from the speakers that there is local need, and we've heard that 3 of the 4 dwellings have interest in them from local people. And I think it's commendable that we are not talking about sort of 5/6 bedroom mansions here. We're talking about 3/4 bedroom, I don't know what you call them, middle ranking houses or whatever you want to refer to them as. And I think that's commendable that, you know, they're not just seeking to build really expensive ones. So clearly, this, in my view, would add to the vitality of the village, because I take the view that there should be small, limited amounts of development allowed in villages to keep them, keep their vitality, and to keep the energy and young people, or whether it's young or younger people, living in the village. So, on, where are we? Page 38, paragraph 23, near the bottom, that refers to, from the MPPF, and it says beyond the key settlements, development will be for local needs only. Well, I believe that this does help satisfy local needs. And in terms of going up the page to paragraph 20, it talks about the MPPF again, and it says permission should be refused for development of poor design, etc., etc. I don't think any of those are a problem, and in fact planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments function well and add to the overall quality of an area, visually attractive and sympathetic to the local character, which in my view I can't see why these won't be fulfilling that. In recommendation 2 on page 42, it does actually say that it's not considered that the proposal meets an identified local housing need. Well, anecdotally, we seem to be hearing that it is fulfilling a local need. So that's the policy issue. But then if you just look purely at the physical side, I think, I think the agricultural bit is probably slightly a bit of a red herring, because I'm viewing it in terms of it being on the edge of the village, and whilst it might not be an infill, and Mr Pegram has quite rightly identified that infill is not clearly specified. However, I view it more as a squaring off of development, because you already have the built dwellings or buildings on the west side of London Lane, and this, in inverted commas, squares off the village, and in my view doesn't extend the village any further into, whether you want to call it greenfield or open countryside, I'm not really bothered. If I could just seek Mr Pegram's help in just zooming in on the preschool, the most southerly building on London Lane, you will also, it's clear on the Google Earth that I'm looking at. In fact, that is, I don't know if it's a domestic garden or it's being used perhaps as a play area for the preschool, I would imagine, at the very bottom of the photograph. But that is not open countryside. It is, and I've looked on Street View, and it's a very substantial hedged area, and clearly is a domestic use and not open countryside use. So you could argue even that the domesticated area actually continues even further than this proposed site. But even just looking at actual physical buildings, in my view, it squares it off. Therefore, it's not isolated at all. And if we've heard from the local ward member, I've searched high and low. I can't see anybody objecting. I'm sure that if there were objections, they wouldn't be quiet and we'd have heard about them. And the fact that there aren't any objections, the parish council supports it. So I really do not agree with the officer's recommendations at all. I think this is appropriate development. And so I cannot agree with the recommendation. I suppose to move it on, Mr Chairman, I'll propose that we actually approve, that we grant approval, subject to sort of the conditions that might become necessary, which I'm sure they will. Oh, I didn't mention the tree. Whether this development existed or not, I think that tree needs coming down anyway, because it's so close to the road. I don't think that that's much of a consideration. So whether this application was even in existence, that tree needs coming down. So with that, I'll propose approval.
Okay, well, you're making it, you've put your views across and you're proposing approval. Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Smith?
I have nothing to add. I mean, it was a very comprehensive response from my colleague here, and I will second his motion for approval.
Okay, thank you. So proposed by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Smith. Now, we had got some other councillors wishing to speak, but Mr Pegram, did you want to come back on some of those? I'll come to Councillor Jones next, but Mr Pegram.
Very briefly, Chairman, yes. Members are quite entitled to consider whether this is an unacceptable encroachment into the countryside. Chairman, I do get a little concerned when I hear remarks about there are no objections to this scheme and what weight might be given to that issue. Clearly, the starting point for any decision, in accordance with legislation, is the development plan. Comments from third parties, whether they're objection or support, are other material considerations that need to be weighed in the balance. The fact there aren't any is not an overriding reason to grant permission, though. So just to advise members on that point.
Thank you. I think, well, yes, thank you. Duly noted. Councillor Jones, I saw your hand go up. So,
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the design of the properties are fine, look very much in keeping. But what struck me was these are not starter homes. Detached houses of 3 and 4 bedrooms are not starter homes in a village enabling young families to move in. They are, by most people's standards, fairly rich, expensive properties, and there's no evidence apparently being given to the opposite effect. the comments that Councillor Clark's made are fine in one sense, but every development on the edge of a village creates another leapfrogging opportunity, and there are other fields behind and over the other side of the road from it which equally well could be met and justified if this went ahead. So personally I accept the officer's view that it is outside the established form of the village, and as you've said, whether there's support or objection is not the important consideration in the planning. So I'm supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jones. Do you want to pick up on that? Or I've got Councillor Bushman next, please.
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure if...
No, Chairman, it wasn't.
Oh.
No. Yeah, sorry. As I indicated, that's not the best one to look at, actually. As I indicated during my presentation, the other approvals related to this area in here, which are to the north, however, considered by your officers to be okay, just the other side of a line, but nevertheless within what we consider to be the edge of the village. So not the same applicant, but
I did understand that, but I was just wondering whether the same applicant had applied previously and got permission. And he actually possibly at one time owned a lot of the property along there. And it was a continuous application to build and adjoin to previous applications. That's all I
Okay, well,
want
I
to
think
know.
that's an interesting question, but I'm not really sure whether whoever a person or people are who puts an application in is necessarily
Well, it would
relevant
if
to-
it was the same applicant.
Well, not necessarily, because whatever planning application you're looking at, whether it's put in by one person or two people or whatever, you're looking at the plans. It doesn't really it's irrelevant really who is putting the application in, or indeed who owns the land. I would suggest. I think I'm right.
yes, you're correct, Chairman. Yes.
But thank you for your observation and your question about the boundary, the adjoining site. Councillor Stockwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to support Councillor Jones's comments, actually. The Council has a very clear policy with regards to how we move forward for small settlements that want to provide for local residents and local families, and that's the rural exception site policy and the process of producing a housing needs survey and then finding a site and then developing that site for truly affordable properties, which are truly affordable and are kept truly affordable for the future through legal conditions. We have spoken about this a number of times at committee, and we've had some very difficult applications with regards to the impact that they would have on small settlements where they aren't actually wanted. I think it's very important that we do support local communities, and the way that we support local communities is through the neighbourhood planning process, through the housing needs survey process, which identifies rural exception sites. We also have the Developing Local Plan 2, where if people felt that this was an appropriate and sustainable location for development, given that we've just gone through practically every village in the borough, trying to find more places to put houses because of the inability of a certain council to develop houses on a larger site. then it really would have been the case that Willoughby on the Wolds could have come forward if it were a sustainable site. This is not a sustainable site. This is not a rural exception site. This is not small scale infill. We should consider this and support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stockwood. Councillor Mallender, did you have? Oh. Oh, sorry. Mr. Pegram said Councillor Mallender. So he's just putting your card on. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Okay. Councillor Podu-Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting application this, because I can see that there are elements of our policies which it doesn't exactly fit into, and it is mentioned in paragraph 27 that it is not a sustainable site. I know this village well. I started there 30 years ago as the local man from the Prue, and I know London Lane very well. You know, there used to be a shop on the corner. It was in the post office. There was a pub at the time, and of course, like many villages, of course, things have disappeared. And what we won't do is make places sustainable if we just simply leave them as they are. And of course, Councillor Stockwood is absolutely right to mention our specific policies on initiating rural exception sites. But every now and again there comes along something which actually might, by accident, meet sort of housing needs generally. I'm not saying that this in any way pretends to be affordable or whatever. But for me, there isn't an absolute, clear, definable edge to that village. And I'm very much in agreement with Councillor Clark that I don't think myself that any development on that site would be completely unacceptable and beyond the village envelope. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm minded to support this application. I think it may not quite fit into various boxes and labels that we've determined previously. But each application, as we all know, is considered on its own merits. And is this acceptable? Yes, it is. Yes, it is on greenfield site. And by heavens, have we not been busy ourselves giving permissions for large greenfield sites without any mention of the Greenbelt? So I think this is acceptable. This is, and I think it was very wise to allow the public to speak at these events, because I think we've had a very powerful case put forward to us this evening. So I am minded to support this application. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Podu-Horan. Mr. Pegram, do you want to come back on any of those points?
Yes, Chairman, just for the benefit perhaps of the public that sit in the gallery and hear the comments that we make at these meetings. Yes, we are building on large parts of countryside. We're expanding some of our towns and villages. However, Chairman, as I think it was Councillor Jones alluded to a moment ago, that is a planned strategic approach to growth. The sites we have chosen are in towns and villages where there are the facilities to support growth, and therefore you cannot draw a direct comparison between what you're looking at tonight and a development that we may have approved in, God forbid, shall I say, Eastleigh or Ratcliffe-on-Trent or anywhere else. Those sites were chosen for growth because they are towns that have the facilities to support that growth. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Right, we've had quite a few comments. I'll do a...
Can I ask?
Yes, Councillor Stockwood.
Can I ask that when considering the motion that is before us to grant planning permission, that we may wish to the mover and seconder may wish to consider conditions for contaminated land, the need for a bin store, a planting scheme, the highway conditions included the lake reps, and whatever process is necessary for the diversion of the footpath should it be granted planning permission.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. All those, no problem at all. And I'll just conclude by saying we all want Willoughby on the Walls to stay the same, don't we? If you want things to stay the same, you need to make changes. Otherwise, they just deteriorate.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hadn't intended to speak on this item, but listening to the debate, we're very clear we're under pressure on land to build houses. We've got a development plan, we have strategic sites, and we have a very clear policy of where housing should be built and very clearly where it shouldn't be built. What we've got here is a difficult site, and I don't back away from that at all. It's not infill on any reasonable view of the meaning of that word. This is not infill. It is a greenfield site. It is not starter home. It is not affordable housing. If this was a rural exception site, as Councillor Stockwood does, I'd be supporting it fully, but it isn't. It's a greenfield site. No mention has been made of the fact that this site is significantly higher than London Lane. It's 1.5 metres higher, and that's on the ground level. So this is a much more prominent looking set of buildings than we would normally have. It is open greenfield, and therefore I'm afraid I can't support Councillor Clark's motion to approve. I think the officers, in a fine and balanced judgment, and it's difficult I know, have got this one right. So I shall be supporting refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Well, of course, that's why we're all here, is to have these important and complicated and sometimes difficult decisions to make. But Councillor Clark, you want to
Can I just clarify? I don't know why everybody keeps going on about starter homes and affordable homes. I never said anything about starter homes and affordable homes. I said that, in my view, it was appropriate development. So, and I referred to the fact that it was, you know, I used the phrase middle-ranking houses in terms of medium size or whatever. I never talked about starter homes and affordable homes. It's appropriate development in my view.
And that's a perfectly understandable view you have, but there was reference to starter and affordable homes with reference to planning policy and development frameworks and so on. But if it was attributed to you, then I'm sure that people understand it wasn't necessarily attributed to you. But I think we understand those points. And indeed in the report. Right, we've had quite a lot of this. Is there anything I'm minded to draw things to a conclusion on this? Is there anything you want to add to?
No.
Right. Well, we've had. I think we've had quite a.
You come back after.
Indeed, yes. But we've had. I think everyone will agree. We've had quite a good discussion on this application, both for and against. We've got the proposal from Councillor Clark and Councillor Smith to grant permission with relevant conditions. So we better, I think, go to a vote on this. Well, if we're all clear what the recommendation from Councillor Clark and Smith is, which I think we are, can I have a show of hands for those in favour of that recommendation, which in other words is in favour of approval of the application? Can we please show, please?
Fine.
And those against?
6, Chairman.
So that recommendation is lost. We now need another motion, please, which goes back to the original recommendation as per the report on page 41. Do we have a councillor? Whose hand went up first on that? Councillor Edwards, I think. Are you second?
Chairman, I'd move the recommendation in the report to refuse permission.
Thank you, as per the report. And Councillor Mayles, you are seconding that recommendation. Okay, so we better have a show of hands on that, please. Those in favour of that recommendation, as per the report, please show your hands.
6
Chairman.
6, and those against? That's 5. So that means that decision is taken as per the report. Permission is refused. Thank you. We'll now move on to our next application, if we're ready, which is the old schoolhouse, Goatham Road, Kingston-on-Soar. This is a demolition of 5 timber sheds and an erection of a carport or tractor store with a games room over the top. And Mr. Pegram, please, again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application relates to the old schoolhouse in Kingston-on-Soar. This is the property in question. It is a Grade 2 listed building, so I shall come on to the relevant advice in just one moment. What I would add is that is not the full extent of the curtilage. You'll see another plan in a moment which defines what we determine to be the residential curtilage. That's the aerial photograph, so you can see it is a rural location. You have Kingston Hall off the map over here, which is also a listed building and part of a registered park. That is the rear elevation, actually, of the old schoolhouse. Quite a substantial building. These buildings in the foreground, you can see, are the sheds which are to be demolished as part of the proposal to make way for the proposed cart shed cum carport structure. That's on the other side now, stood in the driveway to the property. So again, it's these ones here that would be demolished. This brick-built one on the right, you can see the gable creeping into the picture, that would be retained, and the building over this side would also be retained. That's looking more full-on at that building. And then looking back, apologies, it's not a great photograph, but showing you, gives you a feel for the relationship and the closeness of those buildings to the old schoolhouse, which has now been obviously converted into a dwelling house. Again, that shows the full extent of the applicant's ownership, but I think in fact the plan that's in your agenda, apologies Chairman, I haven't got it on the presentation, but that one shows more the extent of what we consider to be the domestic curtilage of the property. The proposal is for a carport or cart shed. I think it's given a different description in the report as well, but effectively it's a building with a pitched roof, has a carport either side of a central equipment store with a staircase, sorry, go the other way, a staircase up to a games room at first floor level. The proposal from the front would look as such, so that's a door infilling the equipment store. The ones on the outside edges are open carport for vehicles to be parked. That's the rear elevation of the building, so that's the dormers on the rear, not the front, with a pedestrian door at the rear. And again, just showing, Chairman, the relationship of the old schoolhouse. That's the building to be retained that I pointed out, as is that one, and the proposed structure sits in that position. This is a landscaping plan just to show that those are the existing trees to be retained as part of this proposal. Chairman, the fundamental issues here really are the property is a Grade 2 listed building. So in accordance with section 66 of the Town and Country Planning Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act, we have to give special regard to the desirability for preserving and enhancing the setting of that building. If there is any harm identified, that must be given significant weight in the determination of the application. You have the comments of your officers. The Conservation Officer considers that the impact of this proposal is neutral and therefore preserves the character or the setting of the listed building as described as desirable within the aforementioned Act. The other factor, Chairman, which is quite significant here is we are in the Green Belt. Clearly, paragraph 145 of the Green Belt MPPF sets out the closed list of development which is not inappropriate. New buildings in the Green Belt are considered to be inappropriate development. This is clearly one of the exceptions is an extension or an addition to a dwelling. where it doesn't result in a disproportionate increase or addition over and above the original dwelling. This is clearly not an extension. This is a freestanding building. However, Chairman, case law tells us that in these instances, an outbuilding can, depending on the relationship with the host building, be treated as an extension. It's all down to the question of relationship, proximity, i.e. closeness of the building. In your officer's view, Chairman, this building is sufficiently close to the listed building and the old schoolhouse to be considered as under that exemption of an addition or extension. And we don't consider that that would result in a disproportionate addition over and above the original dwelling. Clearly, other factors that are relevant, Chairman, are design, the appearance of the building. It is timber-clad, timber-framed with a slate roof. It does not compete with the design and appearance of the listed building and is therefore considered to be sympathetic to and subservient to that building. There are no highway issues associated with this because it utilises an existing access. Generally, Chairman, this is considered to be an acceptable proposal and is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. And I think we have a speaker on this item as well, Mrs. Williams, who will be speaking in support of the application. So, as you saw before, up to 5 minutes, and the right-hand button on the microphone will turn the light on and the clock will start. Okay, thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Caroline Williams, one of the applicants in the matter, and I'd just like to say a few words in support of the application. We've lived at the old school for nearly 20 years and feel very privileged to live in this historic building. So we're very mindful of the importance of not doing anything that would have a negative impact on it. So in the context of making this application, first of all, to say we appointed an architect, David Pycroft, to advise us on planning and design issues. We consulted with our nearest neighbours living at Church Farm, a Grade 2 listed building, and Church Farmhouse, and I think both of those could be seen on one of the plans that was that has been put in front of you. None of the neighbours had objections to the application. We also contacted the parish council to ask if they wanted to discuss the application or view the site, although we didn't actually receive a response from them on that. As been stated, the proposal is to demolish a number of small and decaying timber outbuildings and replace them with one timber outbuilding comprising a carport and room above. So the proposal would thereby tidy up the site and provide parking for domestic vehicles, as well as much needed storage for garden machinery, tools and equipment. Just turning to the objections that have been received on this, the parish council objected but made the point that they fundamentally are not opposed to a structure to satisfy our requirements. Their concerns centred first around the trees and hedges, as there were no plans on the portal at the time they submitted their decision to enable them to reach a view, and secondly the size and scale of the outbuilding in the context of the listed building. Both of those concerns have subsequently been addressed, firstly by the landscape officer, who commented that he has no concerns about the proximity of the building to adjacent trees. All the adjacent trees are shown to be retained and will provide a pleasant backdrop to the new building. A number of comments in the Conservation Officer's report are also relevant. For example, he says there would be no vantage points from which the proposed outbuilding would be viewed in context with views of the hall. The proposed building would not impact upon the setting of Church Farm to the south. And the impact of the proposal will be modest and largely neutral, and I would not consider the proposal to have an adverse impact upon the settings of nearby heritage assets, including the old school itself and Kingston Hall. The Borough Councillor objected, but purely on the basis that he wanted to give local people opportunity to present their views to the Planning Committee, which they don't seem to have taken up today. As regards to local residents, as I've already noted, the people living closest to the application at Church Farm and Church Farmhouse have no objection to the proposal. There were no objections and in fact some support from people living in the village. The majority of the objections were from residents of Kingston Hall. As was noted in the Planning Officer's report, the application site abuts the pleasure gardens which form part of the grounds to Kingston Hall. However, Kingston Hall itself is around half a mile from the application site, and the distance between the two is emphasised by the fact that Kingston Hall doesn't appear on the plan that was before you, whilst the main village of Kingston on Soar does. The planning officer has addressed the objections in his report, but if I could just touch on a few points. The proposed outbuilding will be surrounded by a significant number of mature trees, including limes, plane and walnut, both in the host garden and adjacent to the boundary between the pleasure gardens and the old school. It will be sited well back from the road and well screened by a 7-foot stone wall which runs along the roadside, which means that only the roof will be visible, and then only when approaching from the north, with visibility largely blocked by the screening trees. The site can't be seen from public spaces around the site or from Kingston Hall itself, and due to the tree screening can only be glimpsed from the pleasure gardens, so its visual impact is therefore extremely limited. One of the objections was poor choice of materials, and on this point, first we were advised that timber would be suitable as it gives a relatively rustic feel which works well with the surrounding trees. We were guided by the fact that an application for a very similar timber-framed and timber-clad carport in the grounds of Kingston Hall was approved in April 2017, and we note that there were no objections to that application. We were also guided by the pre-application discussions and the emphasis on the outbuilding having a subservient character. Both the planning officer and conservation officer consider that a timber outbuilding, which is lightweight in construction and appearance, give it the appropriate subservient character. Highway safety was also raised as an issue. During the construction phase, construction vehicles will access the site via a separate gate further along on Goton Road, which has an improved sight line, and well built there will be no change in the number or frequency of cars using the current access. The planning officer recommended that the planning permission be granted, and as the relevant planning issues have been addressed favourably in his report, I'd like to ask the committee to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Bang on 5 minutes. You must have been practising, but thank you for that. Right, we have no other speakers on this item, no other public or external speakers on this item. So, Mr. Pegram, would you like to pick up on anything, or is there nothing to add, really?
No, nothing to add.
So we'll go straight into discussion. Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Before I heard the presentation, I was of the view that the design, the location, is fine, and it is sympathetic to the parent building and the variety of other buildings in the vicinity. It may seem a bit nitpicky having heard the applicant's presentation, but there's two just bits in the conditions which I'd like to suggest. This is thinking of planning beyond the current occupants. In condition 5, although I know what it means, I think it would be strengthened if the second part of the sentence said, the sentence said, the outbuilding hereby permitted shall be used incidental and ancillary to the main dwelling, the old schoolhouse, and shall not be used, and I would suggest the words for residential purposes before it says or let as a separate residential unit or for any other purposes. So it's just clarification that it shall be not for residential purpose. I know it would not be intended as such, but you never know what happens in the future. And also paragraph 9 referred to a tree protection condition, which again I take it the motive is fine, but it's not picked up in the recommendations. Paragraph 9.
Oh, paragraph.
On page 46, sorry. It said the canopy would be about 5-6 lines down. It refers to might need fencing off during the construction period to protect it, and a tree protection condition may be prudent. So I'm proposing it be accepted with those two amendments to the conditions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We'll just take some comments and advice, I think. Mr. Pegram?
Yeah,
we're just looking for it now. Just bear with us.
Where did I write it?
Numerous pieces of paper.
Too many bits of paper, Chairman. Paper light.
That will never work.
I'll try and remember this one, Chairman. It's obviously the words in condition 5 might be considered superfluous. It's quite clear to me that it's not to be used or sublet as a residential unit of accommodation. There is obviously the games room at first floor, which is for ancillary residential activity, and we need to be careful that any wording doesn't prohibit that or conflict with the intended use. In terms of the tree protection condition, Chairman, I have no objection at all to that. I think it is wholly appropriate given the proximity of the site to the trees. However, the only issue there is that that would have to be a pre-commencement condition, and in accordance with the Town and Country Planning Pre-Commencement Condition Regulations 2018, we are precluded from granting permission subject to pre-commencement conditions unless those conditions have been agreed with the applicant. So if members resolve to grant consent this evening, before we can issue a permission, we would have to seek agreement from the applicant to such a pre-commencement condition. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Now, Councillor Jones, you see what you started there, and
I did warn previous meeting, Chairman.
do you want to come back?
I take it from what we've heard from the applicant that agreement will be likely to be forthcoming, but nevertheless, I think it's important, and I do think the wording for residential purposes as part of the main unit, as opposed to being let, the word let suggests it would be a separate residential use. But anyway.
Chairman, if Councillor Jones can give me a little bit of latitude to think about that, I'll insert, if Councillor Jones, I don't think he's moved approval yet, but if I will look at that wording to strengthen that condition in accordance with the wishes. Even if the applicant is here and she nods to the pre-commencement condition, I've clearly got to get it in writing. It could be an exchange of emails, it could be very quick. I do think it's an appropriate condition given the comments of the landscape officer and the proximity of the trees, but clearly I have to raise that as an issue where members are proposing what needs to be pre-commencement conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. I hope that was helpful, Councillor Jones.
It was. I still have the same view about the changes to the conditions. Thank you.
I will look at that.
Are you are you actually making a proposal here? You are proposing. So have you got a seconder for that, Councillor Manager?
Yeah, I was raising my hand earlier to say that I would second, provided I think condition 5 does say that, because it says the old school house shall not be used or let as a separate residential unit. So I think that is what it means. Shall not be used. So, I mean, perhaps we need a comma after used and one after let to be clear that it shouldn't be used or let. But I fully agree with the comment made about the tree protection, however. And I don't know whether, I don't know. You're saying we can't actually say that anymore. I'm a bit...
No, we can impose pre-commencement conditions. What the regulations preclude us from doing is granting permission subject to pre-commencement conditions unless we've agreed them with the applicant. I'm hoping in the majority of cases, Chairman, that the applicants will simply agree to those conditions. Not talking on this generally, on this one, but generally I'm hoping that applicants will see the need for those pre-commencement conditions. It's all about the government pushing for development to get going quicker. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm fine seconding it anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Mallender. It's because everyone wants things to be more efficient and swift in decision making. Right. We've had the recommendation moved and seconded. Have we got? Oh, Councillor Mayles. I'm sorry, I didn't see you indicate.
Mine is only a small question. Mrs. Williams indicated that it would be well screened. Have you got a slide from a view from the roadside, so we can see what's what?
No, Chairman, I'm afraid I don't, but I think from the description of the site, you see that obviously the trees on the north side do provide substantial screening. I believe there is a wall along the roadside as well, which I can't pick up. So it does, clearly you'll see the upper parts of the building above any wall or bushes and things, not the trees, but otherwise, yes, I think we were satisfied that it wouldn't have a significant impact on the surrounding area. Thank you.
No, I didn't think there would be, but I just wanted to be certain. Thank you.
I hope that's helpful for you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Tuesday afternoon, being a nice sunny afternoon, I took a drive out to Kingston on Soar because in previous times of going along this road, I'd quite missed this building, and it's a delight. I approached it from the north, from the Kingston Hall end, and in fact I'd gone past it, and let me reassure Councillor Mrs Miles, there is a wall and high hedging that protects all this. The house itself, the report says it was built in 1848. It is in fact very clearly 3 separate buildings that have been merged into one. The 1848 building was a house, and then there's a big stone plaque in the gables that says it's dedicated to Lady Belper, who obviously by grace and favour put a classroom there so that the village children could be educated. And then on the other end there's a much more modern lean-to. I say more modern, 60, 70, 80 years or more old. So in fact, although it's a grade 2 listed house, it's a Mr. Pegram's obviously having some difficulties following my argument. I'll pause for a moment because I would like Mr. Pegram's attention. That's right. And in fact, I had to walk back to find the entrance, the vehicle entrance, which is very much shrouded from the road. Ah, that's more like it, yes. And you can see there that those buildings are well screened. It's a high wall. The concerns about it being in the green belt, appropriate development, I accept all of those, but I also accept that this is a perfectly reasonable addition in place of the motley collection of old buildings. And on that basis, Chair, I move the recommendation to approve.
Thank you.
Plus the tree protection.
Yes, it has already been moved and
Councillor Jones moved.
Double move.
Yes. So no, we don't want any arguments as to who's moved it first and seconded it second. Right. So you accept the fact that it's already been moved and seconded. Right. Do we have any other speakers on this one, please? Right. Okay. Well, I think we've. Is there anything else you want to add before we go to a vote? I think we'll go to a vote on this, and so we've got the proposal. The recommendation has been moved and seconded with the comments about the amendments, which Mr. Pegram is going to follow up on. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour of the recommendation, please.
Unanimous.
So that's unanimous, so permission is granted.
And if I could just
I was going to say, do we need to add? Yes.
Yeah, well, obviously, yes, agreeing the pre-commencement condition. I would like to assure Councillor Edwards that I was paying attention to him whilst I was playing with my cables, but thank you.
It's a skill. Right, thank you. So that's. We'll move on to our next application now, then, which is a roundabout at Stragglethorpe, Nottingham Road, Cropwell Bishop, and this is to display 4 freestanding pole-mounted signs on the roundabout. And Mr. Pegram, you got the delight of this again.
Thank you, Chairman. I will hand over to Mr. Sharman in just a moment. Chairman, I just did need to make an apology in terms. We did send out the late representations. The comments from the ward councillor, he apologised he couldn't be here, he had another engagement. The comments from the ward councillor were originally sent to me in a format which I could not open on my computer. I passed it over to IT, they converted it, but unfortunately I didn't get the whole bit, so you haven't got everything that he sent in. So on this occasion, Chairman, I will just read out the last bit. Carrying on from where it is in the late representations, he says, this was agreed with Notts CC, and I attended a meeting where they were adamant that no trees or high shrubs could be planted and only local grasses and wildflowers could be used. The local farmer, Samworth Estates, agreed and planted it and have since maintained it at their cost and have now, and have not put any advertising on it. It now looks very attractive and fits with the rural environment at no cost to the taxpayer. Finally, I would ask you to reject this application on the grounds of safety and respect the rural local initiative. Sorry, Chairman, about that. So, yes, the application relates to a roundabout on the eastern side of the A46. It's the intersection that takes you off to Cropwell Bishop. I'm sure members will be familiar with this. It's where the anaerobic digester and the chicken sheds are located. On the south side of that roundabout, there's also a petrol filling station. That provides you with the aerial photograph showing roundabout, and this is where the anaerobic digester is. These photographs are taken by the case officer at the moment, so these are looking generally in a northerly, northeasterly direction across the roundabout. In fact, I think they may have been taken by Mr. Sharman. Across the roundabout towards the anaerobic digester. So the roundabout is obviously in the foreground there. That's looking more westerly towards the A46, and again you can see the roundabout. The only signage on the roundabout at the moment is the highway traffic signage, so it's got the chevrons and the directional arrows, just in case anyone's in any doubt about which way to go around the roundabout. This is looking in a more southerly direction, so again the A46 is in this position. And then that is looking again over the roundabout towards the petrol filling station to the south of the roundabout. Looking easterly now, so you can see the chicken sheds there. And then the signs, Chairman, I would ask you to perhaps ignore the content of the signs. Advertisement regulations require that we consider advertisement regulations on the basis of amenity and highway safety. The content is largely irrelevant. You are effectively agreeing, or being asked to agree, the principle of erecting sponsorship signs. So obviously that content could change over the years depending on whether the sponsor change. But this is just a mock-up to show you it would be sponsored by, with the name of a company, and then obviously the county council strap line along the bottom. In terms of the size of those signs, they would be 400 millimetres deep, 1 metre across, and 100 millimetres above the ground level. So it gives an overall height of the sign of around 500 millimetres, half a metre. Okay. And the advertisement panel is obviously 1 metre by 350 millimetres. In terms of, these are the adverts, sorry, these are the photographs, I should say, that were sent in by the applicant as part of their application. It's a mock-up to show you where they would be sited in relation to the chevrons. Again, this is one of their photographs looking across towards the anaerobic digester. We've seen these, so I won't dwell on those too long. The ones I will go to, Chairman, are the ones that the ward councillor sent in, which are, yes, these ones onwards. The ward councillor is particularly concerned that the signs may distract drivers on the roundabout. He suggests that there have already been incidents when vehicles have had to drive, or have driven the wrong way up the exit slip from the A46, and the Highway Authority have put in place temporary no entry signs to try and avoid that happening. Again, this is one of the photos taken by the ward councillor, and again looking up a slip road showing those no entry signs which he is concerned about. Chairman, as I say, the application must be considered on two grounds: amenity impact, so that's the impact of the signs on the character and appearance of the area, and highway safety grounds. Clearly they are relatively modest signs. Given the other structures on the roundabout, your officers didn't consider that they would detract from the character and the appearance of the area. On the issue of highway safety, Highway Authority do not object on this occasion, Chairman, so there are no highway safety concerns which have been raised by the technical consultee. The application is recommended that advertisement consent is granted for the display of the advertisements as seen on the presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Well, we have no external speakers on this, so we'll go straight into discussion. Who would like to start or make Councillor Bales?
It does say 5 years, for a period of 5 years. What significance is 5 years, please?
Yeah, I know. Chairman, well, thank you, Ian. It is in the regulations. In fact, if we do not put a condition on specifically specifying it, it is, in any event, it's implied through the regulations that the consent is for 5 years, after which time we could challenge any advertisement that's displayed, even with the benefit of previous consent. But in this instance, we are obviously clarifying that point, saying that the consent would be valid for 5 years. But as Mr. Norman picked up, it's out of the regs, basically.
Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Thurman. please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I don't know. I suppose it is likely that the advertising will change, as we've been pointed out. But and it also looks as though it's already okay by the Peg County Council. So the signs are going to be, as it says here, 400 metres in height.
I don't think
Millimetres.
400 millimetres in height. And they will be attached to poles with the bottom edge of the signs at 100 millimetre from the ground. So you got to basically 500 mil. It just seems an odd thing to me. I don't really know, but I mean, if it sets a trend, we could be swarmed in advertising boards on every roundabout we come to.
Go to America.
All right. Anyway, that's
Councillor Thurman, Mr. Pegram is keen to come in and to add some clarity on this, I think.
Chairman, just to clarify, that the purpose of this is obviously to generate revenue to maintain the roundabout. So clearly it's not intended as an advertisement, it's a sponsorship initiative, and clearly some payback for the sponsor is they get some form of advertisement, but then obviously the money that they get for the advertisement on the roundabout does maintain the roundabout. That's the intention of the initiative. Thank you.
We're all getting very excited about this one, but the next councillor who indicated to speak was Councillor Jones. So, yes, I've got Councillor Jones, then Councillor Malland, and then Councillor Mrs. Smith. So, Councillor Jones.
Can we clarify, the applicant's Mr. Steve Green or the County Council? That's the first thing that seems a bit odd, unless Steve Green is the developer who owns islands. But I have some sympathy with the ward member about the distraction, not so much the height, but the actual length of them, but the thing in total, having 4 of them competing with a very small directional arrow. And I think some of the double islands either side of that main road can be confusing for people who are not used to them. And I have a lot of sympathy with the ward member saying, yeah, it affects the character of the area in general, and it can be distracting compared with the size of normal highway signs.
Yeah, although it has to be borne in mind that once again the Highways Department, even though it is the same authority but it's completely separate, hasn't raised an objection, has it?
Well, yes, it's the same authority, and we're entitled to make judgments of from our own experience on
Absolutely
these islands.
right, and indeed I'm very familiar with that those roundabouts as well. Mr. Pegram.
Councillor Jones did ask a question,
yes,
Chairman.
yes.
The applicant is named as Mr. Steve Green. He works for a company which is also appears on the application form, Community Partners Limited, of 7 Harrison Road, Halifax, United Kingdom. I think they are a company, Chairman, that operate on behalf of local authorities, I should say, not highway authorities, local authorities, to promote this type of sponsorship deal. The other points, just to pick up one of the comments that Councillor Jones made, it's also in the advertisement regulations, Chairman, and you'll see it's a standard condition that an advert cannot be displayed so as to hinder, obscure or affect the interpretation of any road or traffic sign.
Maybe the sign should also say this is in the Royal Borough of Rushcliffe.
I think we're diverting a little bit off the main issues here. Councillor Mallinder, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask, so I wasn't quite sure what the ward member said about the upkeep of the roundabout. So it was, it's planted for wildflowers, is it? It's just that I think it might be part of the Rushcliffe Nature Conservation Strategy if it's planted for wildflowers. But is it supposed to be a wildflower meadow? And is that what the money for this from the advertising is going to be used for? Because you said about the upkeep of the roundabout. Because there doesn't seem to be any mention of that or any discussion with the Wildlife Trust or anything. So, could you answer that, please?
What I noticed, I know that the planting that was that has been done on there was done by a local farmer who had worked with the parish council, Cropwell Bishop Parish Council, because that's very, as you know, is fairly new roundabout, and they wanted to make it look pretty because it was so the local farmer took it upon himself to plant grasses and flowers and so on in it. I think that's correct. But with regards to whether the advert is paying for it, I suspect not. But
Chairman, that's largely a irrelevant factor who's maintaining it at the moment. As I say, my understanding of the initiative, which you see throughout Nottinghamshire and within the Nottingham City area, is that these signs are to attract sponsorship to maintain the roundabout, which would otherwise have to obviously be maintained at the public purse. The fact that this one's maintained by a farmer currently, in my view, Chairman, is irrelevant. You must consider the application based on what it's for. I don't think it's intended to create a wildflower meadow, Chairman. I think given it's sort of circulated by a road, it wouldn't, in my view, that's not the main purpose, obviously, to generate a biodiversity habitat. In this instance, the purpose of this is to maintain the roundabout in a tidy condition, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mallender.
Yes, sorry, actually, edges of roads are well known to be a major source of sort of pollination areas for bees and so on. They're actually excellent areas, so all those road verges and things. So I'm not interested in who maintains it at the moment. I just wanted to know whether it was maintained as a wildflower meadow or something like that as for pollinators, in which case it would, and whether that upkeep would include that. But since you use the word tidy, I presume that that isn't what the money is going to be used for. Thank you.
Indeed, one person's version of tidy is different to another person's version of tidy, is it not? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, when I first read this item, and I read it through, and I thought this is all very straightforward. And I turned to page 60, and I said, well, it says approve. And I thought, so then I had to check my calendar, make sure it wasn't 1st of April. I couldn't believe that we're approving this. Why is money a consideration? Why is paying, this is to pay for the upkeep? How is that a planning consideration? We've just heard from Mr. Pegram that he said the content of the sign is irrelevant. I'm sorry, but it's extremely relevant because it's a matter of road safety. So somebody comes to the roundabout, oh, I can't read that. Oh, I'll stop and read the sign and I'll make a note of the telephone number or whatever it is, and then I'll drive on. We've already heard, and you've seen the photographs, there is already a problem with that roundabout because it's confusing, because people have driven up the slip road the wrong way, which is why those temporary no entry signs are there, because they thought that they were taking the next exit, which goes to Cropwell Butler. And they were looking for this, and it's poorly signed. They were looking for the Cropwell Butler road, and they end up going up there, which is why those temporary no entry signs have been put there, hopefully, as a prelude to permanent no entry signs, I sincerely hope. So my really strong concern is of road safety. Why put an advertisement in the middle of a roundabout? In other places, we are told that people can't have advertisements just on a road because it's a distraction for road users. And suddenly, on a junction where you have to be looking elsewhere other than the middle of the roundabout, we're told that suddenly this is acceptable, that you should stop and read a sign and note things off it. I'm absolutely staggered. I think this will lead to a serious road safety problem because I'm convinced that people will be distracted. I'm going to propose a refusal, Chairman, on the grounds, and I've been scribbling feverishly, on the grounds of one, will result in detrimental harm to amenity and safety, including highway and pedestrian safety, creating an unnecessary distraction. Right, it will result in detrimental harm. You see, I'm cribbing from the relevant planning policies that are at the top of the page. So that gives you a clue as to what the phraseology is. It will result in detrimental harm to amenity and safety, including highway and pedestrian safety, creating an unnecessary distraction to road users negotiating the roundabout. Yeah, negotiating the roundabout. 2. And this picks up one of the other points in paragraph 15. The signs are unnecessary as they do not relate to or inform of a business or service carried out on the site. The first one. Paragraph A. I mean,
B.
Little a of paragraph 15. 3. It is considered that the display of the signs will endanger public safety. That's picks up E of paragraph 15. And 4, does not respect the visual amenity of the roundabout. That picks up number 2, paragraph B. Little b of paragraph 15, I'll get it right in a minute. I think that hopefully just really says it all, Chairman, because I just think it's, I just cannot believe that we are recommending approval when in other innocuous parts of roads it's recommended refusal. And I do not believe that the highways people have the local knowledge of the area, because in their comments they don't even mention the slip road and the fact that there are temporary no entry signs on it. So they clearly are not aware of the local knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Jones.
Smith first.
Councillor Smith. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Yes, those temporary signs have been there for several months now. I would think, time passes so quickly, I would think probably getting there to 6 months. And I'm equally surprised that permanent signs haven't appeared. There's something else missing from that picture, which was in Councillor Moore's picture. A very, very large Costa coffee cup. There. Has that got planning consent as a matter of interest?
I'm very glad you asked that question, but we'll get back to the application we're talking about, I think.
I will ask our enforcement officer to look into that.
Yes, I think so.
Oh, it's obviously a major distraction.
It certainly is. They must have got distracted. Right, Councillor Jones.
I just wanted to make the additional point in support of Councillor Clark, that many of these islands are badly signed from a highways point of view about where each junction leads to, and unlike some of the city areas where, like the Goose Fair Island, the island on Mansfield Road, where people are travelling at a slow speed, quite often people are coming off A46 at high speed, and it's not a de-restricted speed area. So that adds to the concern about about safety, in my view. As to the cost, I mean, that's less distracting than a detailed detailed floor, but nevertheless, the point still remains.
Oh, you want? Yes.
Yes,
You
yes,
took
I
a
don't
sharp
mind.
intake of breath then.
No, no.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Right. So you propose your refusal for permission for the reasons given. Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Thurman. Thank you very much. Right. So, does anyone else want to say anything on this item? Get Mr. Pegram.
Well, I'll put my hand up in turn with any councillors that still want to speak.
Oh, I see. Yes. I'm sorry. Do any other councillors wish to? Councillor Edwards.
Just very quickly, Chair, I'm very reassured by the very small size of these signs. They will not be a visual eyesore in a rural location. I'm also very aware that for must be more than 20 years, whenever you drive up London Road to the Canal Street junction, there's been a sponsorship sign by various city organisations sponsoring that traffic island. I'm not aware that those signs have caused any highway difficulties with a massive volume of traffic there. So I'm minded to support this on those grounds, and particularly I'm very reassured by the 5-year cut-off. Thank you.
Mr. Pegram.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, just to come back on the motion and the reasons, I'll just reiterate, highway safety is, in this instance, certainly one of the major considerations, or let me say, not in this instance, let me say, in the consideration of any application to display advertisements, highway safety is a consideration, as is amenity. I think Councillor Clark broke it down into 4 reasons. Excuse me, Chairman. I think going through it, we could certainly get 1 to 3 down to 1 or 2 reasons and still pick up all of Councillor Clark's concerns in that reason. The only concern I have to a certain extent on one of the issues is, so highway safety clearly, as I say, is a material consideration. The issue about impact on the character of the area, Chairman, is, in my view, a weaker argument, particularly given the recent developments perhaps taken place in the area. That would be my only concern, Chairman, in terms of, and the fact that there are, as we saw in that image, there are other structures on the roundabout. But as I say, the highway safety, I won't argue with Councillor Clark on the amenity one. I'm a little less confident.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Well, Councillor Smith, you want? Yes.
Come back. What Councillor Edwards said. The signs on the roundabouts at the end of London Road, at the end of Gregory Boulevard and elsewhere in Nottingham have usually got traffic lights holding the traffic up. And if you're in the front of the queue, then you can, whilst you're waiting interminably for the lights to change, you can read the signs. But there's usually perpetual motion round there. There are not traffic jams on that roundabout, and it was quite rightly said, they come off the slip roads or off the other roundabout, and they are hell-bent on getting where they're going and get out of the way. I think is
okay, thank you. And also the London Road example also have those 30-mile-an-hour average speed cameras, do they not? So which perhaps are another factor. Councillor Clark, you wanted to come back on that?
Well, only just to pick up what Mr. Pegram said in terms of, in my reasons, I was picking up the policy EN8 in paragraph 15 and using those as reasons. So, the visual amenity is mentioned in there, and therefore I was picking that up as one of the reasons. I'm a bit concerned about comments that, oh, the signs are only going to be small. Actually, that's probably worse, because you've really got to stop and to read them and know what it says. So, if there's information on it, just people mention the Costa thing. I think 99% of people in the country know Costa. They'll know Coca-Cola or blah, blah, blah. They're not going to recognise these signs. They're going to want to try and read them and see what's on them. And that, to me, is a real road safety hazard.
Okay, thank you, and I do appreciate what you're saying there, because I know the road as well. And Councillor Stockwood, did you want to speak on this?
I was just going to ask about, we're talking about paragraph 15 in the report, and item D is advertisements do not prejudice or detract from and existing or proposed regeneration or enhancement scheme. So I was just curious what we were thinking of as an enhancement scheme. Because could we say that the Wildflower Meadow is an enhancement scheme that's going to be detracted from, and it's going to be detracted, the signs would detract? Yes, well, I'm just saying, does that paragraph apply as well in the refusal? I think I'm more interested. I am interested in the comments being made about a wildflower scheme that's been put in there, rather than just somebody planted it up, which is what was described in Councillor Moore's thing. I think we're on losing a battle with regards to the industrialisation of this area, considering that whopping great big thing next to it. But I can see the points that Councillor Clark's made, and I was just wondering whether the wildflower scheme could be considered an enhancement when we talk about. I don't know the definition of those terms, so.
I'm happy to add that into that same
Well,
reason of visual.
I know that the councillors like to throw the kitchen sink at refusals in the hope that something sticks, but I'm happy to listen to the officer's explanation of an enhancement scheme. And well, oh dear, I'm on tape again, aren't I?
Well, I'm sure the officer would be delighted to give us an explanation of the enhancements.
Chairman, just to be clear, paragraph 15 is basically quoting your policy or the council's policy in the non-statutory replacement local plan. When you're considering a scheme, you then have to consider whether a scheme is at odds with any part or the whole of that policy. You don't need necessarily, and I think the point was maybe made around a roundabout way, you only need one good reason for refusal. Yeah, sorry. Yes, okay. You only need one good reason for refusal. You don't need to throw the kitchen sink at it. I don't know that the roundabout is planted as a wildflower meadow, so I can't say for certain what impact this would have on it. The converse would be, and the argument from the applicant and possibly the Highway Authority would be, this sign would enable them to maintain it as a wildflower meadow or as a as a tidy roundabout. So I would, Chairman, I hear what the reasons Councillor Clark put forward. I would stick with those. I wouldn't try and embellish on it, to be quite honest.
Thank you very much. Right. Really? Councillor Mallender?
I was just going to say, what I wanted was a repeat of what it was that the ward members said about it, because I didn't quite catch, because it's not in the document that we have. It's only in the one that's being read out.
The bit that I think is probably the the bit that I think is probably Councillor Mallender picked up on. The local farmer, Sandworth Estates, agreed and planted it, and have since maintained it at their cost, and have not put any advertising on it. Is it that bit that you're?
So it didn't say how it was maintained. That's why I was trying to establish.
No, I think it's just. I think I'm right in saying. My colleague might confirm. I think Sandworth Farms operate the anaerobic digester in the background, yes. So clearly it is a close feature to their activity. What I cannot guarantee is how long that maintenance arrangement will continue for, clearly.
Okay, right. I think we've probably had quite a sufficient discussion on this.
Gone round and round on this.
We've gone round and round. And no, that's very good. So, Councillor Clark, have you proposed? Have we had a second? We have.
Like Councillor Thurman.
And Councillor Thurman seconded. So we're clear on what we're voting on for. We're voting on this amended different recommendation from Councillor Clark and Councillor Thurman, which is to refuse permission for the reason or reasons given. Show of hands in support of that recommendation, please. And those against? 1. So permission is refused. So for the reasons given, Councillor Smith.
Could we just, in the reasons, say that using our very local knowledge, we consider? Yes.
Yes.
Chairman, you
Because,
don't.
The highways have said they
Yeah.
don't mind. haven't they?
You don't need to put all the information in the reason. As I've advised members before, if you are going against a technical consultee, we would have to, in defending any subsequent appeal, provide objective evidence. That is the point at which we would bring forward that local knowledge issue.
Good. So we are clear on that then. So permission is refused. There's just as some local information from me on that item now. It's all right because the decision has been taken. Every now and again, if I go to and from Cropwell Butler, the road that comes from Cropwell Butler, fine name for a village, and you're approaching the roundabout. Every single time you're exiting that, there is a car speeding around the roundabout. So it is quite a dangerous road. But there we are. With decisions taken, I think we need to move on to Wasdale Close, West Bridgford. Change of use from open amenity space to private garden space. Mr. Sharman, that's why you're here. So over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yes, 22 Wasdale Close. It's a detached property on a large corner plot in the residential area of Ganston now. Committee may remember it was here the same time last year for extensions to the property which were approved and are now largely complete. So this application relates to land just to the southwest of the property. There was originally a boundary fence and hedge along this side here, and the land to the southwest was quite separate to the property. It was left as open with a few trees along it. So the application here, you probably struggle to see it because it's quite zoomed out, but basically it relates to, zoom in, land here to the southwest. You can just about see the trees around the edge of the site, which have all been retained at the moment. And yes, it's to change a small section of this space to residential gardens rather than the open amenity space that it currently is. Right. Okay. We're still zoomed in. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this photograph is taken from stood roughly where the new fence line is proposed. We are looking north towards the garage, and you've got Wasdale Close that you can see there just in the distance. And this is looking in the opposite direction, looking down towards properties at 2 and 4 Scarfell Close. You can see where some of the existing hedge line is still being retained whilst the building works have been ongoing. We're now stood on the shared drive for 2, 4 and 6 Scarfell Close, looking broadly north past the application site. So you can see the application property here, which is 22 Wasdale Close. That is the 2-storey side extension that was approved. And you can see roughly the line of the hedge there where it carries on straight. That's proposed where it's meant to kick out slightly as part of this application. Moving around the site, and we're looking broadly east now from about the front of number 6 Scarfell Close. You can see the side of elevation of the property. You can also see 2 of the trees which are to be retained. The hedgerow to be removed in part would be roughly level with the rear elevation of the property. That's where it would the new fence line would step out about 0.8 metres at the back of the property here, 1 metre towards the centre, and 1.7 metres level with the garage. It would then be replanted with a new pyracantha hedge, and just to clarify, it would remain inside the existing tree line. So now stood on Scarfell Close, looking towards the site. Again, you can see the side extension there, and that's the open space. This is the fence which borders the property of number 6 Scarfell Close. You can just about see the front of the garage over there. Let me zoom in slightly. So that's the front of the existing garage. The change of use relates to land set 2.6 metres back from that, so it doesn't come as far forward as the existing corner of the garage. It's set further back than that, and you can see the existing open land and how it has remained kind of separate to the residential gardens of the property. And again, just from the opposite side of Scarfell Close, you've got a more open view of the land, the whole piece of land there, and this just relates to a small section of land around by the property. Moving on to Wasdale Close, looking broadly north from Wasdale Close. Now, you've got the existing detached garage to the front of the house. You can see, again, the trees which are to be retained on the outside within the open amenity space, with land between them and the garage to be contained and used as a residential garden space. And that's just moving around the site again to the north. You can see the hard boundaries of 6 Scarfell Close in the background, and still some of the trees on the frontage of 22 Wasdale. And again, just a picture of the front of the property where you wouldn't actually be able to see any of the changes themselves. So that is the red line plan, the property. Zoom in for you. So you've got the blue line, which is the ownership of the applicant. This site relates to the red line there, just a small section to the side of the garage and the side of the main house. And zoom out again. And this is the landscaping plan. So you'll see there is a dotted line, which is the original and the existing approved fence line on the site. And this is where the new fence line is proposed to step out. You've got the existing trees all to be retained. Steps out, as I say, about 0.8 at the back here, metre in the middle, and 1.7 at the front there. Still saying 2.6 metres set back from the front of the garage. Now, the main considerations in this application largely relates to the character and appearance of the area. So there isn't any policy specifically against the change of use of open spaces. It is everything on its own merits and what impact, an assessment of what impact each application has. In this particular instance, the officer's consideration is that the extent of land change proposed is quite minimal, and the development would not cause harm to the open character and appearance of the area, given the landscaping scheme proposed as well, and the scale of the change proposed. There's also been some highway safety issues raised by the neighbours. Highways have commented on the application and stated that no observations are required for this application. In your officer's opinion, having visited site, the change of use is well set back from the main access of the shared drive to Scarfell Close, so it's unlikely to have any impact on the visibility displays for people entering and exiting the drive for those properties. So for those reasons, the recommendation before you is that permission is granted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, we have no external speakers on this, so we'll go straight into discussion. Councillor Moyles, please.
Thank you very much. Mine is a query, really. This is an emergency area, so obviously somebody has been looking after it, mowing the grass and so on. Is it the developer or who has been looking after it, please?
Yeah, so it has always fallen within the applicant's ownership. He has maintained the land, but it's always been visually distinct from the residential curtilage of the property, so a separate use. But the applicant has always maintained it and kept it mown, etc.
So the obviously happy for it, the ownership to change.
Sorry, yeah. The ownership remains the same, so it's still his ownership, but he just wants to use it as part of his garden, so that he can use it.
Temporary situation.
That's the permanent change, so that he can use it as part of his garden to store equipment and that sort of thing. Whereas at the moment it's open space, so he can't keep anything in that land. It's open without any boundaries.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, it's just questions really. The fact that the County Council Highways Authority doesn't consider any comments are required is not new. So I think the major issues or the major wish for clarification is what some of the local residents have said, and just want some clarification about that. Because one says it would overhang the driveway and therefore obstruct the view and access. So I'm looking at page 64, paragraph 10. And therefore obstruct the view and access to the neighbouring property to Scarfell. And then number C said it would restrict the vehicle access to garages and parking at 6 Scarfell Close. And then G says the plans are misleading as the plans show a 0.5 deep hedge existing, whereas it's already 1.7 deep. So can you clarify those three things, please?
Yes, Mr. Sharman, yes, please.
Yeah, officers have been out to site and they've measured it out on site in terms of the step out, and the plans are accurate as far as officers have seen on site. In terms of the depth of the hedge, the hedge, the existing hedge to the kind of the top of this plan here has been let to grow and is slightly wider than that, and it does come to almost the edge of the road just for whoever's maintained it. That I think one of the comments relates to they're going to plant a new 1.7 metre wide hedge. Obviously, it's the maintenance of the hedge is up to the landowner, and obviously what is shown is a half a metre wide hedge, and you can see the boundary of the access driveway just there on the plan. So it wouldn't come across the access driveway, it wouldn't interfere with those visibility displays as they come down their driveway, and the main access onto the main road is actually down at the bottom of the plan here.
Okay, thank you. And I think paragraph 26 and 27 are quite helpful in that respect as well. Anyone else on this before we... Councillor Edwards, yes, please.
I'm reassured, Chair, by the modest nature of what the applicant wishes to do on land they already own and use. This doesn't seem to me something that we can really refuse. So on that basis, I'll move the recommendation to approve.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Do we have a seconder?
I'll be quite happy to move the
Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Mail. So we have the recommendation moved and seconded. Any more speakers? No, nothing else to add, I suspect. So can we have a show of hands for those in favour of the recommendation? Unanimous, so that is carried. Thank you. And finally,
Chairman, just very quickly,
sorry, yes.
can I just make a request that the maps be correct? This is at least the second, if not the third time, that Scarfell Close has appeared incorrectly spelt. It's correct in the report, but on the map, Scarfell does not have an R, and it has appeared like that in previous applications.
It's probably... No, I was going to say something. No, I won't say no.
I don't produce the maps, Chairman. It's not a stranger to the area.
I was going to say the map was probably produced. No, I can't say because someone will tell me off. Right. Yes, exactly. It could have been a Londoner. That's what I was going to say. Scarfell.
What's wrong with Londoners?
Nothing. Right. We'll move on to our final application, and this is another reason why Mr. Sharman's here tonight. This is 42 Windlatter Drive, West Bridgford. First floor, front and side extension. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so 42 Windlatter Drive, West Bridgford. Just to clarify for people, the application is before committee tonight because the applicant is a senior officer at the Borough Council, and therefore, in line with the Constitution, the application shall be determined by the Planning Committee. Right.
I refuse.
So the property itself is a two-storey detached house located within Gamston again, and we are towards the end of a cul-de-sac here. The property fronting out and overlooking the Gamston Canal, the Grantham Canal, sorry. And there you go on the aerial photography. You can see to the front of the property you've got the Grantham Canal and open space associated. You've got some allotments over to the west, and you've got the primary school down to the southeast there. So just to go back to that plan, the extension, as you can see, is proposed to the front and side of the property, just infilling across an existing garage. So the photos, that's a bit zoomed in, isn't it? Where's the square one? That one. There we go, that's better. Okay, there we go. Right, so this is taken from the top of Windlatter Drive, looking south down past the application property, which is there on the left-hand side. You're now looking east across the front of the property. You can see the neighbouring properties at 44 and 46. And again to the front there you can see the existing kind of prominent front gable of the house. The extension proposed is at the same level as the existing setback elevation. It would also have a front gable, so infilling above the flat roofed element there behind the garage. On this photo you may notice a window on the neighbouring property. That is an obscure glazed window serving a bathroom on the neighbouring property. And then this photo is just taken looking north from the site. So there's only one window proposed just to the front of the room, which would look out over this outlook towards the Granville Canal. And then just to go over the plans, so have a gabled front, be set down from the main roof, so it's subservient to the main house. No windows to the side are proposed, just the one window to the front of the extension. The main considerations in this application, again, design and amenity criteria in subservient extensions to the main house and any amenity impact on neighbouring properties. So the window at the neighbouring property has been looked at and is an obscure glazed window serving a bathroom. And an officer's view on the matter is that the development would not be out of character with the area. It would be subservient to the original property, and it wouldn't raise any undue amenity concerns in relation to neighbouring sites. And they've therefore recommended approval in line with the conditions set out on page 75 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Sharman. Who would like to start on this one, please? Councillor Stockwood.
There's no ward member objections, there's no public objections. I don't have any objections from it, and I move the recommendation on page 75 and hope that other councillors support me. There we go.
Thank you. Who would like? Do we have a seconder for Councillor Jones? You're happy to second the proposal? Does anyone, Councillor Clark?
I just wondered if, I don't suppose the applicants actually wrote the appraisal and recommendation as well. No, okay.
Just to confirm, Chairman, that as with councillors, we have to declare interests as well. My house, by the way.
I hope that has satisfied you. Very good, Councillor Clark. Very good. Anyone else want to say anything on this, or shall we go to the vote? All those in favour, please show. This unanimous permission is granted. I'm sure. Don't say things like that. Right, that's the end of the planning applications. We've just got to note, really, or the item 5, which is appeal, this planning appeal report, Mr. Pegram. No, indeed. Does anyone want to say anything on the appeals, Councillor Jones?
Officers often remind us that when we turn down their recommendations, we are risking trouble. In this case, we turned down their recommendations and we didn't risk trouble. Thank you.
This was clearly a finely balanced issue, and the reasons that members came up. The reasons that members came up with were clearly material considerations that the inspector gave weight to, and we were able to support them with objective evidence, and therefore didn't risk an award of costs. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And also, ladies and gentlemen, you might be interested to know that I have mentioned this appeal result at least twice to Mr. Pegram, saying we don't appear to have had a report on this appeal on a committee. Indeed, yes, but it was sheer pressure of work, wasn't it? So there we are. So unless anyone else has got anything else to say on this, I think we'll drop a bit. Councillor Edwards.
I was interested on page 77, after the bullet points. The inspector correctly notes that the impact on views across privately owned land is not a material planning consideration. The inspector did observe that this is separate from the provision of adequate outlook. And I found that a very important distinction, that if that had been made in the report, I think it would have, I think it would have been easier for to get a recommendation that led to our decision. And I've not seen the phrase adequate outlook in officers' reports, and I think it's a very helpful distinction to have and can help us reach decisions. Thank you.
Pegram.
Chairman, all I would add is that when we do our training, I do make the distinction between loss of view, which is not a planning consideration, and outlook, which is an amenity issue. So clearly it is a relevant factor, yes.
And a very useful point, and not lesson learned, but just a new thing we've picked up and a new something to bear in mind for the future. Right, with that in mind, I think we'll close the meeting at 8:38. Thank you very much for your contributions and attendance. Thank you.